Chosen one. This is so embarrassing for them. The whole damn town worked together against little old you, and they still lost. Think about that for a moment. Chosen one. An entire community, with all their resources, their connections, their coordinated strategies and unified hatred, mobilized against a single person. And not only did they fail to destroy you, they destroyed themselves in the process. It would be laughable if it weren't so pathetic. Imagine being so threatened by one individual that you had to recruit your family, your neighbors, your local authorities, even complete strangers to help you take them down. Imagine being so weak that you needed an army to fight someone whose only weapons were truth and a pure heart. What they didn't count on was that they weren't just attacking you, they were declaring war on the universe itself. And the universe, as they're about to discover, doesn't lose wars. It just takes its time choosing the most embarrassing way for its enemies to defeat themselves. What started as whispers became a symphony of coordinated destruction. Your ex hadn't just recruited their family, though they were easy marks, blood being thicker than water, even when it's poisoned with lies. No, this network was vast, intricate, and deeply embedded in the very fabric of your community. The revelation came in layers, each one more shocking than the last. Friends you'd trusted for years, neighbors who had borrowed sugar and shared small talk, authority figures who had sworn oaths to protect and serve, even family members, the ones who should have stood by you unconditionally, had been turned against you with surgical precision. They called it concern, they called it intervention, they called it love wrapped in tough choices. But what they were really doing was participating in something that would have made the architects of historical persecution proud. An entire community mobilized against a single individual, all because your ex had painted you as a threat that needed to be neutralized. The scope of it should have terrified you, should have broken you, should have sent you running to the nearest city where you could disappear into anonymity. But you're chosen, remember, and chosen ones don't run from battles they're destined to win, even when they don't know victory is coming. What they didn't count on, and this is crucial, chosen one, is that they didn't count on your pure heart, that organ they could never touch despite all their efforts. You felt the wrongness of it all in ways that transcended logic. Your inner compass remained true, even when the entire world seemed to be telling you that north was south and up was down. When you started to speak up, when you began to point out the inconsistencies and the impossible coincidences, they laughed. Oh, how they laughed. Your ex and their accomplices thought it was hilarious that you were trying to defend yourself. They had you outnumbered, outgunned, and completely surrounded. What could little old you possibly do against their mighty coalition? They were about to find out. Some of your tormentors weren't content with just psychological warfare. They had to get creative. They had to dabble in forces they didn't understand, trying to use spiritual attacks against someone whose spirit was shielded by something far greater than their collective malice. Night after night, they focused their hatred your way, channeled their jealousy, their rage, their desperate need to see you destroyed. They were so confident it would work. After all, they had the numbers, they had the coordination, they had the unified intent. What could one pure heart do against such focused darkness? Everything, as it turned out. The attacks didn't just fail, they rebounded, spectacularly. The negative energy they sent your way hit your natural spiritual defenses and bounced back to them, amplified by the very purity they were trying to destroy. And the effects on them were extraordinary. The insomnia hit first, then the paranoia, the growing madness that comes from having your own malice reflected back at you tenfold. They started seeing things, hearing things, experiencing phenomena that made skeptics into believers and believers into terrified children hiding under blankets. Your ex, that silver-tongued manipulator who had orchestrated this entire campaign, was hit the hardest. They became obsessed with you in ways that were both pathetic and terrifying. unable to leave the past alone because the past was now hunting them, and they knew that facing you would mean confronting the magnitude of what they had done. As their traditional attacks failed more spectacularly with each attempt, your ex descended into increasingly desperate measures. They turned to mirror magic and candle rituals, sending reflections of their own twisted energy your way, hoping to trap you in cycles of doubt and self-destruction. They lit candles with your name carved into the wax, performed rituals designed to bind your spirit and break your will. What they never understood about working with mirrors is that mirrors reflect truth, and when someone with a pure heart looks into a mirror, all they see is love looking back. When someone with a twisted heart performs mirror magic on the pure-hearted, all they accomplish is showing themselves exactly what they've become. Every ritual they perform to curse you instead cursed them. Every mirror they used to send negativity your way reflected their own darkness back at them tenfold. They were literally watching themselves become the monsters they had always been inside, and the sight was driving them to the edge of complete psychological collapse. The candle magic was even more devastating to them. Fire is a purifying element, and when used with malicious intent against someone protected by divine forces, it burns away the practitioner's own spiritual defenses. They were systematically destroying their own psychic protection while strengthening yours. Each ritual made them more vulnerable to the very forces they were trying to command. The deeper authorities dug into your ex's activities, the more they uncovered a pattern of financial crimes that stretched back years. The signature forgery wasn't just about stealing from you. It was part of a systematic operation to defraud multiple victims using sophisticated identity theft techniques. Your ex had been forging signatures on legal documents, insurance claims, and financial instruments with practiced ease. They had stolen identities, opened accounts in other people's names, and siphoned money from victims who never even knew they had been targeted. The operation was so extensive that investigators began to suspect they were dealing with someone who had been trained in financial fraud by professional criminals. But the forgery of your signature was different. It was personal. It was meant to hurt you specifically, not just steal from you. They had forged your name on documents that would have destroyed your credit, ruined your reputation, and left you financially devastated. The level of malice required to systematically destroy someone's entire financial life spoke to a hatred so deep it bordered on pathological obsession. The irony was that their compulsion to destroy you specifically had led them to be careless with your case. While they had been meticulous with their other victims, covering their tracks with professional precision, their emotional investment in your destruction had made them sloppy. They left evidence trails they would never have left with strangers. Their personal vendetta had become the thread that unraveled their entire criminal operation. As their world continued to crumble and their desperation reached new heights, your ex played their most pathetic card yet, fabricating a baby trap scenario. The timing was suspiciously convenient, coming just as the legal walls were closing in around them and public opinion was turning decisively against their entire network. This wasn't just a lie, it was a calculated manipulation designed to accomplish multiple goals simultaneously. They hoped to guilt you into reconciliation, to generate public sympathy for themselves, and to create legal complications that might delay the investigation into their crimes. The fabricated baby trap was their final attempt to control a narrative that had completely escaped their grasp. And the universe has a way of exposing lies that are told with malicious intent, documentation that didn't add up, inconsistencies in their story that became more apparent with each telling, the complete absence of any evidence to support their claims. Even their closest allies began to question this particular deception, sensing that they had crossed a line from manipulation into outright fraud. The false baby trap claim became the moment when even their most loyal supporters began to abandon them. There's something uniquely disturbing about someone who would fabricate potential parenthood to manipulate their victim. It revealed a level of emotional sickness that made even hardened criminals uncomfortable. Their inner circle began to fracture as people realized they had been supporting someone whose capacity for deception had no bottom. The most devastating revelation was yet to come. As the layers of conspiracy peeled away like rotting paint, you discovered something that would shake you to your very core. Your own family, the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally, had been recruited into this campaign of destruction. Not all of them, perhaps, but enough. Enough to make you question everything you thought you knew about blood loyalty and familial bonds. Some were adoptive parents who had never truly accepted you. Others were step-relatives who saw an opportunity to finally be rid of the outsider. But the worst were those connected to you by birth, who had traded your well-being for acceptance into the conspiracy. They had been feeding information to your tormentors for months, maybe years. Your vulnerabilities, your fears, your private moments of doubt, all weaponized against you by the very people who should have been your safe harbor in the storm. The betrayal cut deeper than any stranger's cruelty could have, because it came wrapped in the familiar voices that had once sung you lullabies and wished you happy birthday. But here's what they didn't understand about chosen ones, about souls marked for a special destiny, abandonment by blood. Family only clears the path for spiritual family to emerge. When earthly bonds fail, celestial ones strengthen. When human protection is withdrawn, divine protection intensifies. You were never meant to walk this path alone. The Obsidian Inner Order isn't just another spiritual community, it's a sanctuary for the exiled, the awakened, the ones who've been gaslit for their gifts and abandoned for their truth. Every week we gather live on Zoom, real people with real faces sharing real stories of transformation. There's a former CFO who embraced their psychic abilities, a seer who broke free from religious oppression, and a healer who survived ritual abuse and found their power. Dozens more join us who understand exactly what you've been through. This is your spiritual family. Never gonna give you up. Never gonna let you walk through this awakening alone. Never gonna scroll past your suffering like it's just content. Your exile from the ordinary world wasn't punishment. It was preparation. For this, for us, for the family that chooses you back. Join the Obsidian Inner Order. Link in description. And the universe definitely wasn't finished protecting you. Your ancestors, those who had gone before, those who had fought their own battles and earned their place in the realm of the eternal, they took notice. They saw what was being done to their descendant, and they were not pleased. The haunting began subtly, dreams that felt more real than waking life, shadows that moved independently of their sources, whispers in empty rooms, the kind of supernatural intervention that makes atheists pray and believers tremble. Your tormentors found themselves trapped in a horror movie of their own making. The very people who had mocked your spirituality, who had called your intuition delusion, were now being forced to confront forces beyond their understanding. And these forces were not merciful. The leader of your persecution, the one who had never learned to manage money or emotions, who had always been ruled by jealousy and inadequacy, began to unravel completely, their carefully constructed facade cracked under the pressure of supernatural justice. They couldn't understand why their tried and true methods of destruction were failing so spectacularly. As the investigation deepened, the true scope of the operation became clear. This wasn't just about your ex's wounded pride or a community's misguided concern. This was about something far more sinister, a network that had been operating in the shadows, using experimental psychological torture as a testing ground for techniques that would later be deployed on a larger scale. The corruption ran through every level of authority. Law enforcement officers who had sworn to protect and serve had instead become foot soldiers in a campaign of psychological warfare. They had filed false reports, ignored legitimate complaints, and actively participated in the harassment that was destroying your life. The badge that should have represented justice had become a weapon of oppression, but the rabbit hole went deeper still. Some of the network's members were involved in activities so depraved that even hardened investigators struggled to process the evidence. Child exploitation rings operating under the cover of community organizations, human trafficking disguised as social services, the systematic abuse of the most vulnerable members of society, all coordinated by people who presented themselves as pillars of the community. Your case had inadvertently exposed a web of corruption that stretched far beyond personal revenge. You had become the crack in their foundation that brought down the entire structure. The people who had thought they were destroying one inconvenient truth-teller had instead triggered the exposure of their entire operation. The irony was perfect. In their arrogance, they had brought down the very network they had been trying to protect. Your pure heart had acted like a beacon, drawing the attention of forces that would not tolerate such darkness to continue operating unchallenged. The false reports started to contradict each other. All those lies told to authorities, all those fabricated complaints and manufactured evidence, they began to form a pattern that even the most corrupt officials couldn't ignore. The story that had seemed so solid when told by a unified group of conspirators suddenly had holes big enough to drive a truck through. Your ex's family, those who had joined the campaign against you out of misguided loyalty, began to see cracks in the narrative they'd been fed. Some started asking uncomfortable questions, others doubled down on their hatred, unable to face the possibility that they had been manipulated into participating in something monstrous. The secret society that had seemed so powerful, so untouchable, suddenly found themselves under scrutiny. Because when you target someone who is protected by divine forces, you don't just anger the universe, you expose yourself to cosmic justice. And cosmic justice, unlike human justice, cannot be bought, intimidated, or corrupted. The network that had seemed so solid began to fracture. Suspicion crept into their ranks. The very unity they had used as a weapon against you began to dissolve under the weight of their own returned malice. They started turning on each other, each faction trying to save itself by sacrificing the others. And then came the moment when everything changed. The cosmic joke revealed its punchline, and it wasn't you who was the target of universal humor. The community that had mocked you for speaking truth suddenly found themselves having to confront the reality of what they had participated in, the illegal surveillance, the coordinated harassment, the criminal conspiracy to destroy an innocent person's life, the depths of depravity that some of them had sunk to, because yes, the rabbit hole went that deep, that dark. They had thought they were so clever, so united, so powerful, but they had made one fatal error. They had underestimated who you really are. They had seen your kindness and mistaken it for weakness. They had seen your love and mistaken it for naivety. They had seen your pure heart and thought it made you an easy target. They forgot that the universe doesn't choose weaklings. It chooses those who can withstand the fire and emerge purified, those who can love in the face of hate, who can stand in truth even when surrounded by lies, who can maintain their integrity even when the whole world seems to be against them. The laughter stopped, the mockery died. The casual cruelty that had defined their interactions with you transformed into something else entirely, fear, because they were beginning to realize that they hadn't been attacking a victim, they had been attacking a force of nature. The exposure came in waves, each one more devastating than the last. First, the obvious criminals were caught. The false police reports, the forged documents, the financial crimes, these left paper trails that even the most corrupt officials couldn't ignore forever. Your ex, that master manipulator, found themselves facing real consequences for the first time in their life. The investigation didn't stop there. It couldn't, because criminal conspiracies are like house of cards. Disturb one element, and the entire edifice comes tumbling down. The authorities who had been complicit found themselves under investigation. The community members who had participated in the harassment found themselves having to answer uncomfortable questions. The secret society that had seemed so powerful discovered that their secrecy was both their greatest strength and their ultimate weakness. When their activities were finally exposed to the light, they couldn't hide behind their collective influence anymore. Each member stood alone, accountable for their individual choices. The documentation of their experiment, all those meticulous records they had kept of their psychological torture, became evidence in their own prosecution. The very thoroughness that had made them feel so professional, so scientific, so justified in their actions, now stood as proof of their crimes. The universe, it seems, has a sense of humor after all, because what your tormentors thought was their victory parade turned out to be their funeral march. What they thought was their coordinated attack turned out to be their coordinated suicide. They had spent so much time and energy focused on destroying you that they had forgotten to protect themselves. They had opened themselves up to the very forces they were trying to use against you. And when those forces rebounded, when the spiritual attacks they had launched came back to them multiplied, they found themselves completely unprepared. The baby trap, the desperate attempts to maintain relevance, the increasingly erratic behavior, it was all the result of someone who couldn't accept that their campaign of destruction had failed. They had put everything into destroying you, and not only had they failed, but they had destroyed themselves in the process. The projection was so complete, so perfect, that it would have been poetic if it weren't so devastating. They were the ones who couldn't handle reality. They were the ones who lived in delusion. They were the ones who couldn't accept responsibility for their actions. Every accusation they had made against you was a confession of their own sins. This is when you truly begin to understand why you were chosen. Not because you are perfect, but because you are pure. Not because you are strong, but because you are willing to remain vulnerable in a world that punished vulnerability. Not because you are wise, but because you are willing to speak truth even when it seemed like madness. Your destiny wasn't just to survive their attacks. It was to expose them, to be the light that revealed the darkness, to be the catalyst that brought justice to those who thought they were above it, to be the proof that no conspiracy, no matter how vast or well coordinated, can ultimately triumph over truth. They had tried to break you, but instead they had forged you. Every attack had made you stronger. Every lie had made your truth more apparent. Every attempt to isolate you had connected you more deeply to the divine forces that were protecting you. And now, as their world crumbled and yours began to rebuild, you could see the bigger picture. This wasn't just about you. It was about everyone who had ever been targeted by such conspiracies. Everyone who had ever been gaslit, harassed, or abused by those in power. Everyone who had ever been told they were crazy for speaking truth. The most beautiful part of this cosmic joke was that they had done it all to themselves. Every single consequence they were facing was the direct result of their own choices. You hadn't had to plot revenge or plan their downfall. You had simply had to remain true to yourself, and the universe had taken care of the rest. Your ex, that silver-tongued manipulator, found themselves tongue-tied when faced with the truth of their actions. The one who had never known how to manage money found themselves facing financial ruin. The one who had always played mind games found their own mind turning against them. The community that had turned against you found themselves having to confront the reality of what they had participated in. Some felt genuine shame and sought to make amends. Others retreated into denial, unable to face the magnitude of their mistakes. But all of them had to live with the knowledge that they had been part of something truly evil. The authorities who had been complicit found themselves under investigation. The secret society that had seemed so powerful found themselves exposed and vulnerable. The network that had seemed so solid found itself dissolving into chaos and recrimination. And you, chosen one, emerged from this crucible refined like gold, not unscathed. No one could endure what you endured and remain unmarked, but stronger, wiser, more deeply connected to your purpose than ever before. Being chosen doesn't mean being protected from suffering. It means being equipped to transform suffering into wisdom, pain into purpose, persecution into power. You learned that your pure heart isn't a weakness to be exploited. It is a strength that could withstand any attack. You learned that truth doesn't need an army to defend it. It just needs one person willing to speak it, no matter the cost. And you learned that the universe doesn't abandon its chosen ones. It just sometimes takes longer than we'd like to reveal its plan. The people who had tried to destroy you had inadvertently prepared you for your true calling. They had tested your resolve, your integrity, your capacity for love in the face of hate. And you had passed every test, not because you were perfect, but because you refused to abandon your essential nature. So here you stand, in the ruins of their conspiracy, watching as justice finally arrives. It's not the justice you might have imagined. It's deeper, more complete, more perfectly calibrated to their crimes than anything human courts could have devised. They thought they were writing your story. They thought they were the authors of your destruction, but they were just characters in a much larger narrative, a story of good triumphing over evil, of truth conquering lies, of love ultimately defeating hate. The whole damn town had worked together against little old you, and in the end, that's exactly what it took to reveal their true nature. Because sometimes the universe needs a whole town of villains to properly showcase the power of a single chosen one. Your story isn't over. If anything, it's just beginning, because now you know who you really are, what you're really capable of, and what you're really here to do. You're not just a survivor, you're a warrior of light, forged in the fires of persecution and emerged victorious.